Hi, I'm John Roberts, partner at Moore Kingston Smith in the technology sector. Delighted to be joined today by Vladimir Milic, one of our transfer pricing directors. Good to see you, Vlad.
Good to see you, John.
Today we're looking at transfer pricing and why it matters in the technology sector, particularly for SaaS businesses as they scale up and prepare for investment. Vlad, do you want to tell us a little bit about your role and how you work in transfer pricing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm leading the transfer pricing team at MKS, and we are basically in the market to try and support businesses in pretty much every stage of their sort of evolution. So from transfer pricing policy design through to implementation, all the way to potentially inquiry support and audit support. But increasingly, we've seen interest in this area because over the years, the sector has grown quite rapidly. And that growth has meant that their tax frameworks, and in particular their TP frameworks, have not always sort of been able to keep up. With the increased scrutiny from most tax authorities around the world and changes in global legislation, this kind of creates a bit of a heady brew where transfer pricing is no longer just a compliance exercise, it also has a pretty big impact on valuation.
So thinking specifically about SaaS businesses, can you tell us a little bit about some of those key updates and trends that you're seeing in the space?
So while there's no change immediately in the UK tax transfer pricing legislation, we've seen an uptick in audit activity. And those audits increasingly focus on the DEMPI functions within the business. DEMPI in transfer pricing parlance stands for development, enhancement, maintenance, protection, and exploitation. And those are directly related to the key tenets of SaaS businesses, the IP. So your platform, your data analytics, all of that means that you do need to be careful with where your teams are located and how they interact, because they create the value for the business, which is the focus of a lot of scrutiny from tax authorities and HMRC in particular. We've also seen investors being more and more interested in the area of tax and transfer pricing in particular during pretty much all of the funding rounds. It is a major sort of red flag when businesses are seen to be underreporting their related party transactions. They have misalignment in terms of contractual frameworks, and it can lead to either impacts on valuation, but it can also lead to sort of increase in deal time, and which can sometimes be quite crucial. And the third thing that we've sort of noticed, which is quite relevant for SaaS businesses, is as they scale, they tend to change how they operate in certain territories, or they win new work or expand into new territories. The location of those sales teams in particular can sometimes creates a bit of tension. There are permanent establishment risks, which are not necessarily just a TP conversation, but where your sales teams exercise habitually the right to conclude contracts that can create tension with the local tax authorities demanding some profit be allocated to that. But in addition, as they scale, sometimes businesses tend to forget that their sales teams hit maturity at some point, so you kind of have to let them stand on their own 2 feet.
So what's the right time to think about some of these things as a fast growth SaaS business?
Well, as the saying goes, right, no time like the present. And it is important because in sort of real life, we've seen situations where businesses have been dealing with these issues in pretty much all the different stages. We've had an example where a client has had an issue in the funding rounds because they've centralized all of their R&D efforts in the UK, meaning that all of their IP is built there, all of their IP is owned in the UK. But they were leaving a ton of profit in the sales locations abroad. This was flagged as part of the due diligence exercise and has had an impact on their valuation as a business. We've looked at businesses that have sort of the scaling problem, so to speak. They've had sort of sales teams in location where they've been providing those subsidiaries with free access to their IP as a means of helping them grow and helping them reach maturity. The problem was that they haven't stopped doing that once they've hit a level of maturity where they should be treated as more of a business that's standing on their own 2 feet. And finally, we've had an experience with a fairly mature and fairly developed business that has been growing in the UK quite considerably, and have gotten to a point where they wanted to sort of migrate their IP out of the UK because they were expecting rest of world scaling to happen. So At first, they weren't considering that migration of IP as a major event or a major tax event, but we've had a conversation with them where we've presented the fact that any sort of IP migration is a major trigger for tax authorities. HMRC in particular is very alive to this, and they view this as a potential erosion of profit potential in the UK, meaning that they tend to lean quite heavily on trying to levy exit charges on that IP migration. So essentially, regardless of where you are in your life cycle, you should be looking at this framework as it pertains to pretty much every facet of your business.
What sort of things, when you're talking to CFOs and FDs, what are some of those key considerations?
I think sort of the main one is to map out your business, map out the value creation in your business. Where do your teams sit? What it is that they actually do and how they contribute to the overall value of the business. This is particularly relevant for SaaS businesses as they exploit intangibles that are quite often the focus of inquiries, but it's also the importance of data gathering and exploitation of data is growing, and there is a keen eye on that from most tax authorities. With that mapping, you should be able to sort of build yourself a robust transfer pricing policy that aligns value creation with profit attribution. So those are kind of the key ones. The DEMPI comes into play quite a lot, and it is crucial to get that right, essentially. We also tend to talk to clients about making sure that they review their intercompany agreements and make sure that their transactions are covered. Those agreements should really reflect reality, and that's kind of always been the most important facet of keeping on top of it, because we all know businesses change, businesses evolve, and what your teams used to do 2 years ago may not be the same as they are doing now. But if your contractual agreement is falling behind and not really reflecting that, you could be in a situation where that's not ideal. We've seen this quite a lot in sort of deal making, that every investor is now quite alive to tax frameworks and are quite keen to understand potential tax exposures. Transfer pricing has often been flagged as one of the real issues that has had an impact on valuation.
Do you find you're working, obviously now within a more global, within the network, are you working cross-border with some of our overseas teams?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the transfer pricing lends itself quite well to that sort of international aspect. And we've grown in understanding the network, we've expanded the network, and we collaborate quite intensely with each other. But the important thing is we are there for clients in pretty much every major jurisdiction.
If you were to talk to a CFO tomorrow and outline something you think he should do as a number one priority, what would that be?
I think essentially it is crucial to make sure that you have a robust and supportable transfer pricing policy in place. The TP model is there to ensure you have a smoother conversation with your investors. It is also there to ensure that you have a smoother conversation with tax authorities if you have it already prepared and lined up. Transfer pricing is, as I've said, it's no longer just a compliance exercise. It's no longer just a matter of, we prepare documentation, we file it, and that's kind of it. It is genuinely a means of retaining and maintaining value for the business. And doing that for the long term is quite significant and quite important.
And so what does a good transfer pricing study look like? What does it look and feel like?
Well, that's a good question, and it's a bit of a how long is a piece of string type of question, but it has to align with what you do as a business. It basically has to make sure that you're covered off both sides of the equation. You're looking at where you create the DEMPI, where you create the IP, but you're also carefully examining how other teams contribute. So what does your sales team do? What are your R&D teams doing? Do you have data analytics teams tucked away someplace where you might have not paid attention, but they've actually grown and became a much more important part of your business? But you also need to align to some of the metrics for SaaS businesses. You have to be careful of how you manage your ARRs, how you're managing your gross margins, whether you're leaving enough in the territories that make the contribution. Ideally, it is an exercise. It's a live exercise. It's not something you do once and you just kind of leave it. So you have to be alive to the changes to your business as well.
Are there any particular territories or countries that are sort of further ahead in their thinking on this, or are there any particular examples you could draw on from that perspective?
Countries tend to be quite collaborative in most of these. So a large part of sort of DEMPI approaches has been driven from the OECD framework. Right. Some territories are more alive and more sort of on it, as it were. I think there are a couple of examples of countries that are quite aggressive in terms of how they enforce transfer pricing. So Australia is one of them. The ATO is notorious of it for being a a tough to deal with tax authority. Some countries across Europe have stringent compliance requirements requiring you to submit things annually, to do translations into the local language, like Italy, like Poland, and places like that. And obviously, the US is a major player in everything that happens in software, and as such, the IRS themselves have a keen eye on valuations in particular. Migration of IP is a really big point for HMRC as well. And I would say that those are kind of the immediate things that come to mind. But most of the world is coming alive to transfer pricing as an issue.
We talked a little bit about today about tax due diligence, and you touched a little bit on the transaction activity. Mm-hmm. Do you work closely with other team members in the firm around how you approach the transfer pricing aspects within the due diligence?
Certainly. I mean, we do get called in to examine to examine the transfer pricing positions of targets, and when we're on both sides of the deal, basically, to sort of make sure that we are in a position to provide a red flag or to sort of assuage some of the questions that may have arisen as part of the deal. But we usually try to advise clients that they're better off going into the process ready rather than trying to deal with it while the process is ongoing. Ultimately, as part of sort of the support that we provide to our own teams, we do come in as post-deal integrations happen as well, because once the business has been acquired, there's usually a bit of time where they need to figure out how to kind of push them into or build a TP policy around them as well.
I think you touched on most of the aspects I was going to cover, but are there any other triggers, events, or activities that happen, particularly within SaaS businesses or technology sector businesses that we?
Yeah. So I would say new markets are always interesting. New products are also quite interesting. If you're changing in your pricing model or leaning more significantly towards subscriptions and ARRs versus one-offs, it is quite important to sort of make sure that you've examined the impact that may have on your existing transfer pricing.
So transfer pricing is really important. It's something that clearly we want to make sure our clients and businesses are taking seriously. Just to wrap it up, what would you say are kind of key things as a call to action for our clients?
Yeah, I would say that transfer pricing should be front of mind regardless of the stage of business you're in at the moment, because it can have an impact on your deal making and ability to attract funds and investors. It can have an impact on your long-term valuation, and having essentially a robust and supportable transfer pricing model in place allows you to mitigate some of the risks attached to discussions with tax authorities, discussions with fundraising, duration of deals, and the time it takes to complete things. But equally, it also allows you to protect basically the long-term value of your business and your IP.
Thanks, Vlad. That was really great insight and really useful information around transfer pricing.
Thanks, John.
If you'd like any further information around transfer pricing and the things we've discussed today, then please go to our website or our other channels, or alternatively reach out to Vlad and the team.